Oh, no, I have one more.
I call Claire Curran.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, Mr. Speaker, with your indulgence, I too would like to acknowledge the absolutely important contribution of Celia Lashley to our country and to so many parents, mothers around this country, around the growing of gorgeous boys into good men, a book which I have next to my bed, and having two 14-and-a-half-year-olds boys is something of great importance in learning how to raise them and to listen to them and not to be too pushy. Her loss is a loss to our nation, and I'm really pleased tonight that so many people have acknowledged her. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to express my disappointment that the Minister in his speech did not address not one of the issues that were raised during the committee stage of this bill. And there were a number of really important issues that were raised. And what that makes me conclude, Mr. Speaker, is that the Minister did not even bother to read the committee stage speeches and to even consider some of those important issues which I am going to list here tonight. Thirdly, Mr. Speaker, New Zealand takes very seriously its important role in our part of the global community as a good international citizen, and takes that, and what that means is that we have a sense of our place in the world as being independent and sensible and rational and caring, and our obligations, meeting our obligations with regards to international treaties, such as relating to this bill with oil stockholding obligations, is just one of many treaty obligations that we take seriously. But we do it with a sense of knowledge and thinking and being clear about why we are fulfilling those obligations, and we are not lapdogs. We are not lapdogs as a nation, Mr. Speaker, and never should we become lapdogs where we are blindly going and following the path of other countries without really thinking through and debating the reasons for doing so. An important point to make in the current context. We have no quibble on this side of the House with fulfilling our obligations, our international obligations with regards to oil stockholding. It's clear that we have to fulfil those obligations. The point of this bill, which is not a major piece of legislation, is that we're looking at how we can do that better and how we can do that in a way that is more modern, and it's an updating of legislation. There was quite a lot of discussion at the Select Committee. I am one of the few members speaking on this bill who actually sat through the Select Committee debates around this, of which I'm going to acknowledge weren't massive and weren't long and ongoing, but there were some important questions asked, and one of those questions was around the cost of this bill and the impost on petrol costs and whether that would be significant. Mr. Speaker, we were reassured, we were told very clearly by officials that this would have a very minimal effect on petrol costs, and I'd like to acknowledge tonight the important contribution that my colleague Stuart Nash made around announcing that that Labor is calling for an inquiry immediately into the way that petrol costs are actually happening and the supply chain in this country, and who is actually bearing the cost, given that the price of oil has actually gone down and we're not seeing the results of that in our own country. So just putting on the record and reinforcing what Stuart Nash said is that it's critically important that we watch what happens following the passage of this bill, and that there is no leeway given for oil companies in this country to use this as an excuse to put costs up in any way, or even to halt the decline in cost, the reduction in costs of petrol, and using this bill in some way as a reason, as a cover for anti-competitive practices or practices that we would need to consider in an investigation. The other thing that has not happened as a result of this bill, and there was a very big opportunity, and the Minister unfortunately has not taken that opportunity, was to look at exceptions. The officials, and during the discussion on this bill, it was pointed out that airline fuel is excluded and the cost of airline fuel is excluded in the levy that is being collected as a result of this bill. So officials said that the international jet fuel is exempt from taxation under the International Convention on International Civil Aviation, and is currently 15% of New Zealand's fuel consumption, including the fuel used for international transport. Just as an aside, we're also not seeing a reduction in the cost of airline travel, despite the reduction in the cost of the fuel. And that is another issue that I think is important tonight. But the point of that is that during the committee stage of this debate, the importance of biofuels as being part of New Zealand's future fuel, the way that we're producing fuel, was touched on, and it was touched on in the discussion on the bill, but its importance was never acknowledged in an amendment put up by my colleague Dr. Megan Woods to exempt biofuels from this bill was voted down by the government across the House. Why was never discussed? Because we've never had the opportunity to discuss it. That the importance of of that part of the industry has certainly been acknowledged, and in fact the government has got some investment into biofuels. But in terms of using that, and in fact I'm just going to read you a bit of the officials' advice here, where they said that a way of reducing New Zealand's net oil import dependency was through greater efficiency of transport and the use of alternate fuels such as domestic biofuels and electric vehicles. The use of biofuels and electric vehicles in the transport sector is increasing from a small base and has the potential to meet a greater proportion of transport energy demand in the future. Well, why then wasn't this used as an incentive for that sector? Why couldn't this bill have been used as a way of increasing the incentive for that sector? Well, I guess that goes to the heart of another problem that Labor has with this bill, and that is that there's no joined upness about this bill. There's no sense of it forming part of a bigger picture around energy security generally in this country and alternative means of energy, developing alternative energy sources. There's been inaction on a wider energy strategy, and therefore it doesn't fit into it. It's a bill that sits on its own. It's a piecemeal piece of legislation. Labor is supporting it because we support our commitment to meeting our treaty obligations, because we don't have any particular issue with the change in mechanism that is being used for the levy. But we do raise issues around the cost of petrol and around the bigger picture around that, and why those costs aren't coming down, and why the government isn't looking at that as part of a bigger picture, and why there isn't a bigger discussion happening around an alternative energy strategy for New Zealand? Those are the big questions in this debate and this discussion. Unfortunately, not once has the government got up, has any member of the Select Committee or anyone representing the government who has knowledge of this sector got up and had a discussion about the bigger picture in this area. Now is the time to do that, and while we support this bill, we're putting that challenge across the House.